Hello there. So, my housemates are out again, and when they're out, I tend to make videos, mainly because I'm quite embarrassed to talk when people are in the house, which is very silly. I am ridiculously short of breath, and that's because I can't breathe through my nose because I've got a cold, which is really pathetic, but also spent the weekend in hospital, which is quite sad, really. But it's fine, so just thought you should know that I'm not just horrifically unfit, although I am also horrifically unfit, let's be honest now. But I look really fat things over. Let's do a less fattening angle. When you're fat, there's no less fattening angle. This is a better angle. Yeah, no. So yeah, thought I'd do a video, mainly because I feel daft if I do a video when people are in the house, because I've never said anything in particular. So, at the moment, I am currently writing an article for Student Media, ooh, famous politician, ooh, about why I don't identify with the word queer. Now, it's not a word that I like saying, even, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a slur, it's an insult, it's homophobic, it's transphobic, and if someone says it to you, they're probably going to hurt you. So I don't like saying it. I don't even like saying it out loud, but for reasons of the fact that it's taken off everywhere else, one has got to say it and hear it out loud these days, which is quite upsetting, really, because I thought I'd left that behind when I left homophobic small-town Yorkshire, but apparently not. So, it's very trendy to associate with that word. I'm not saying that being trans or being LGBT or whatever is trendy. I'm saying that the use of that word to describe it is growing in popularity. And where, like, even 5 years ago, I wouldn't hear the word, now everyone's calling it. You know, I don't know if it's an import, I don't know if it's a US thing, I don't know if it's because things like Tumblr are just spreading the idea that, like, it's not a homophobic slur anymore. I don't know where you all picked that up idea. But, there we go. So, yeah, and people say to me, you know, well, you're trans, and you're bisexual, and you're a socialist, why do you not identify with queer? You know, it's a word for radical politics, like yours, and my politics are pretty radical. Like, not to be all like, oh, I'm radical, but in terms of social, fiscal politics, I would describe myself as a socialist. I haven't narrowed it down beyond that. I used to call myself a Marxist feminist, but then I grew disillusioned with the sort of people who also call themselves Marxist feminists, so I'm not sure. But basically, I am a socialist. My politics are pretty extremely far left, and people on the far left tend to call themselves queer more than anything else. It's as much a political sentiment as it is a social one. And people say to me, you know, well, why don't you call yourself queer? Several reasons. First, bisexuality. I do not believe that a relationship with a man, for me, is inherently different to a relationship with a woman. The only difference is that it's with a man, not a woman. And that is, in itself, not enough of a reason to call it different. Now, people react to it differently. Societally, it is reacted to differently. It's got shame and guilt built into it, whereas a relationship with a woman might not be. Although that's complicated when you're trans, because I grew up being told fancy men, don't fancy women. So when I fancied women, which I did pretty much exclusively till I was 16 or so, that was the thing I got punished for societally, not the fancying men. So when you're trans, again, that's complicated. But I believe it would do a disservice to men that I had relationships with to say this relationship is inherently different because you are a man and not a woman. So I don't see my bisexuality as inherently queer. Like, it's a thing. I do fancy men and I do fancy women. And I do class myself as bisexual, not pansexual, because I'm not attracted to non-binary people, which is a thing I'm allowed, controversial though that has been. But I'm not, part of how attraction works for me is that I see someone as a man or as a woman. So if I dated a non-binary person, that would be really unfair on them, because I wouldn't be seeing them as what they were. So I'm not attracted to non-binary people. That's allowed. So I am bisexual, but I don't believe that a relationship with a man, for me, is inherently different in itself, in a vacuum. It is obviously with how it's societally reacted to, but it's not in terms of the actual nature of the relationship. And I don't relate to my boyfriend going, oh, you're a boy, this is gay, very same-sex this, very same-sex relationship this, oh, hello. You know, I don't think of that, I just talk to him like a person, because that's what he is, first and foremost. Like, that's not, gender doesn't really play into it. Like, it's not a thing that characterises it for me, it's a thing that obviously is there, but not one that, like, if I lived in a non-homophobic society, I would not see any difference whatsoever between relationships with men and relationships with women. And as it is, the only reason I see a difference is because people react differently to men who date men than they do men who date women. So I don't believe my bisexuality is queer. I also don't believe my transsexuality is queer. Now then, the word transsexual is one you are often not allowed to use, because some people don't use it. Now, I'm not saying you have to use it. I'm not saying the word transsexual is the only valid word. Whatever word or words or sentence or whatever you use to relate to your body and your identity and the cultural space you occupy, feel free. I'm not telling you not to use those. Just because I call myself transsexual does not mean the word transsexual ever has to pass your lips, ever. Seriously, that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I personally refer to myself as a transsexual, or as a transsexual man, or as a man with transsexualism. Preferably, I would say man with a transsexual past, but because I'm still in the process of transition, that's kind of inaccurate, so... But I also don't believe that that's inherently queer. For me, it's a medical condition. I was born wrong, I'm taking steps to correct that, and in 5 to 10 years I will no longer need to take any steps to correct that beyond taking hormones, because I'll be doing that for the rest of my life. I don't have to, it's not an identity, it's not a thing I identify with. I have other medical conditions, disabling ones which I was also born with, which mean I have to moderate my life, and they're also a bit rubbish. So I see being transsexual for me as a medical condition, not as something inherently queer. It's not queer any more than it's queer that I have an insulin-secreting tumour, for example, which I do have. That's not queer, so why would being trans? I appreciate that being female-assigned and being a man is quite rare, and that some people find that shocking or unsettling, but that's not something that changes it for me. Like, the societal reaction is, yes, not great, but that doesn't make me inherently different. There's nothing different in how I'm male compared to how a cis man is male. Because although I'm doing the male thing without the socialisation to back it up, and I'm doing the male thing without the body to back it up at the moment, it's still, at its heart, what it means to me, for me to be male. And again, I'm not saying anyone has to feel the same. I'm not saying anyone has to share my opinion. Don't be upset because your opinion of yourself as male is different to mine. So the reason I see myself as male is because my body should have a flat chest and a penis. That's what it means to be male. No more, no less. It's not to do with social things, it's not to do with the space I occupy in society, it's not to do with how I relate to other people. I mean, of course, being male influences that, but that is not why I am male. It is like that purely because of how I think my body is mapped to my brain. And because I see that as a neurological thing, as a wiring thing, saying that that's inherently queer is also really weird to me. And also, with the label queer, I think a lot of people use it who have very little in common with me. Talking about middle-class people. Now, I realise I'm probably talking to a mixed audience, this is Tumblr, this is YouTube, whatever. I mean middle class in the UK sense. I've never seen a decent definition, but basically, like, not working class. Because no one's upper class, because you've got to actually, like, have a title for that, and who's got a title? If you're watching, you've got a title, just... No, I'm sorry. Yeah, so... I see myself as from a working class background. Not working class, because, like, I'm at uni, for God's sakes. That's not a working class thing to do. But as from a working class background. And all of the people who I see calling themselves queer are, like, upper middle class. And they're all like, oh, mummy and daddy this. Oh, I went on holiday to Africa that. Oh, and I mean, all of this stuff, like, in yourself, great. I'm glad I'm glad mummy and daddy have really nice, like, jobs. I mean, mine have good jobs these days. I'm not... Oh, it's a mess, basically. My thoughts on class are a mess. But just saying that, like, these people are from a very different class background to me, and when they call themselves queer, it's sort of a rebellion against a sort of middle-class conformity which they see coming and don't like. And I don't have the same inevitability of middle-class conformity in my future. I've had to fight like hell to get to university, to get anywhere in life. I'm still fighting like hell. I still live way below the poverty line. It's hilarious. I can see my breath indoors at the moment because it's freezing. It's March, for God's sakes. I ain't got no money. Culturally, I'm different to all of these people, and I'm not going to use some label what pretends that the most difficult thing in my life is that society reacts to my sexuality and gender differently, when it actually isn't. It's the fact that I've got no money, which is a product of that, but it's a product of other stuff too. So there's middle class people, and there's also just how cis people that seem to think that describing themselves as queer will stop them from being transphobic. Like, I've seen people say, oh, I identify as queer so I can learn to unpack my transphobia. That is not doing nothing for your transphobia, right? The real way you learn how to not be transphobic, if you are a cis person, talking to trans people, learning what trans people go through, listening to trans people talk about their experiences and what they expect from you. That is how you are not transphobic. You take all that on board, and I mean, different trans people will have different opinions on what that means. There's no perfect guide on how to be an ally. But you do all that, you listen to trans people, just magically slapping the label queer on yourself don't mean nothing. It doesn't make you less transphobic, it doesn't mean you've tolerated anything, it doesn't mean you've learned nothing. And to be honest, if you're the sort of cis person who reckons I'm inherently queer, because I've got a body different to what I was meant to grow up into, then you're probably quite transphobic. Because that argument is that trans people are somehow special or different or other, just because we disagree with what we were assigned at birth, and that's not a thing I identify with. I mean, again, if you do identify with that, great, feel free. I'm not, for like the 7th time in this video, I ain't telling no one how to identify. Just that is a incoherent mishmash of my thoughts. I'm writing it up into a 500 word piece for student media, gonna write a longer blog post, it's quite a controversial thing. Feel free to call yourself queer. If you recognise yourself in any of the cis or middle class people in this video, please note that I know a lot of clueless cis middle class people, and you are probably not the one I'm on about. Because I like everyone I know in real life. Wow. Okay, thank you very much.